All right, well, it is 12 o'clock and we do not want to waste any time at all. First of all, it is oh wait, people are just still coming. It's really good to see everybody. Those of you who I got so many nice emails from so many of you this week. I'm doing fine, feeling better and better, and should be back on my feet by next week, but was really glad that we were still able to join together today to hear from Rabbi Preisand. So before we get into her presentation, I want to just acknowledge the events of this past weekend and what happened in Colleyville, Texas. The heroism of my colleague, Rabbi Charlie Citron Walker, and I think the apprehension that all of us feel now coming back into synagogue is going to be a multi-layered experience when we're ready to do so. But I also think that Rabbi Preisand's presence here shows us about resilience, teaches us about hope, and reminds us that absolutely anything is possible. So, Rabbi, while I know this is not ever what you intended your rabbinate to represent, we also know how important symbols are in Jewish tradition, and we're grateful that you can be here to remind us of our resiliency, of the possibility of change, and the prevalence of hope in Jewish tradition. So we're just delighted to be able to learn from you about the positives, that now we get to turn around and look at all of the amazing things that we've accomplished as a people and will continue to accomplish. So you all already know the most outstanding thing on Rabbi Preisand's resume. However, I think it's also important to know that Rabbi Preisand has had a distinguished rabbinic career with lots of teaching and preaching and inspiring and helping that goes so far beyond the designation as the first woman ordained in America. Although when I was growing up, you were just the first woman rabbi to ever be ordained, and I'm sure we're going to talk about that. But here's the picture I want to paint for you. When the WRN, that's the Women's Rabbinic Network, when we get together at a conference or a meeting or whatever we do something called roll call, which means that we say everyone who was ordained in, what year is it, 2022? That's mind-boggling. Stand up and cheer. So we cheer for 2022, we cheer for 2021. I stand up and cheer when we get to 2010, and then the whole room stands up and cheers when we get to 1972, the year that Rabbi Preisand was ordained. And you are the only one who stands at that time. So we stand here all in our homes for Zoom for you today. And we're just honored that you're able to share your story with us, and delighted that your story is one that can be shared. So I will stop talking and turn it over to Rabbi Preisand. And yes, all the reminders about Zoom etiquette, hopefully we know by now, but I'll also monitor on my end. If anyone gets accidentally noisy, I will not hesitate to mute you. Thank you.
Thank you for that warm and gracious introduction and reminding me about the roll call, which I also enjoy. I wish I could be with you all in person, but I am grateful that the gift of technology makes it possible for us to connect in this way. I really don't know very much about your rabbis, but the fact that you have a female rabbi on staff tells me a great deal about your congregation and about your senior rabbi, who has obviously set an example when it comes to inclusivity and other things, I'm sure. And although I don't really know Rabbi Mason-Barkin, I do know her parents. And I am sure they are very proud of her and her decision to follow in their footsteps and serve the Jewish people. Today, I want to tell you a little bit about my journey to the rabbinate and share some reflections on my career as the 50th anniversary of my ordination approaches. And there will be time at the end for your questions. I decided I wanted to be a rabbi when I was 16 years old, way back in 1962. Unfortunately, I do not remember why. I do remember always wanting to be a teacher, And whatever my favorite subject was is what I was going to teach. So one year I was going to be an English teacher, and then a math teacher, maybe a French teacher. And in the end, I decided to be a teacher of Judaism, which is really what a rabbi is. Fortunately for me, my parents gave me one of the greatest gifts a parent can give a child, and that is the courage to dare and to dream. As a result, I always remained focused on my goal, unconcerned that no woman had ever been ordained rabbi in America, and determined to succeed despite the doubts I heard expressed in the organized Jewish community. In those days, I did not think very much about being a pioneer, nor was it my intention to champion the rights of women. I just wanted to be a rabbi. And although my parents were actively involved in Jewish organizational life, my family was not particularly observant. We did light Shabbat candles, celebrate Hanukkah with our extended family, and have a Passover Seder, to which each of my siblings and I were encouraged to invite a non-Jewish friend to share the festivities and learn more about Judaism. I can still see my father at the head of our table, reclining on his pillow, leaving the table at the appropriate time to wash his hands, explaining the symbols on the Seder plate, and reading every single word of the Haggadah. My mother, of course, had been preparing for days, making gefilte fish from scratch and fashioning those delicious matzah balls that were especially light and fluffy. One year, my father's business brought him into contact with a Catholic children's home run by a group of nuns. Passover was approaching, and in the course of conversation, the Mother Superior began asking questions about the customs and traditions of this holiday. Before long, my father had offered to conduct a Seder for 52 nuns and the Monsignor, volunteering my mother, of course, to oversee the meal and make enough chicken soup and matzo balls for all the participants. My father read the Haggadah, and the youngest nun asked the 4 questions. My mother, whom we lost just a few years ago at the age of 101, remembered entering the dining room on the day of the Seder and being greeted by a huge sign that said simply Shalom. Moreover, the nuns presented her with a beautiful 2-tiered silver tray that we continue to cherish. My father died in 1968. I will never forget the kindness of the nuns who, dressed in their traditional garb, came to our home while we were sitting Shiva to remember my father and give thanks for his life. And I am ever grateful to my parents for teaching us by example that all people are God's children, and we have much to learn from each other. As soon as I began to express more than a passing interest in our religious heritage, my parents made certain to include among my birthday or Hanukkah presents more Jewish books, often inscribed by my father with a few words of encouragement, a wonderful way to expand my horizons and at the same time validate the seriousness of my intention. I grew up in the suburbs of Cleveland, and when I was in the 8th grade, my family moved from the east side of town to the west. As a result, my teenage years were spent in a predominantly non-Jewish neighborhood. In fact, my brothers and I were the only Jews in our high school. That made our participation in religious school and youth group all the more essential. We were active members of Beth Israel, the West Temple, a small congregation that taught me important lessons about what it means to be a temple family and how central to Jewish life is the task of tikkun olam, repairing the world. Although I did not become bat mitzvah, I was confirmed and I continued my religious school studies through the 12th grade. As the time for college approached, my desire to be a teacher of Judaism remained firm. And I knew that for me, the best way to accomplish that goal was a career in the rabbinate. I applied to the undergraduate program jointly sponsored by the University of Cincinnati and the Hebrew College Jewish Institute of Religion. I was accepted, and in 1964, I began my studies. My years in religious school were fraught with challenge. Some members of the college community thought I came to marry a rabbi rather than be one. In fact, I had been dating one of my fellow students for a long time when a professor went up to him one day and said, "Well, when are you going to do the school a favor, marry her and get rid of her?" So my sincerity was often suspect. Consequently, I was under constant pressure to prove myself. Always, I felt the need to be better and do better than my classmates so that my commitment and my academic ability would not be questioned. Occasionally, I sensed that some people would not be overly upset if I failed. More than once, it would have been easy to drop out, but I persevered because I truly wanted to be a teacher of Torah. Happily, I had the support of Dr. Nelson Blick, at that time president of the College Institute. He gave me his unqualified support and took care of a lot of little problems that I probably never even heard about. Unfortunately, he died the year before I was ordained. But his wife, Helen, a distinguished physician and researcher in Cincinnati, told me that prior to his death, he said there were three things he wanted to live to do, and one of them was to ordain me. His vision and commitment laid the foundation for the ordination of women. And fortunately for me and for all of us, his successor, Dr. Alfred Gottschalk, shared that vision. And when he became president of the College Institute, he made the dream a reality by ordaining me on June 3rd, 1972, together with the 35 men who were my classmates. Only in recent years have I come to understand how bold and daring that action was on his part. Apparently, certain members of the faculty tried to convince him that I should not be ordained. 50 years ago, I did not really realize the amount of pressure he was under, nor did I understand the courage it took for him to step into someone else's shoes and fulfill a mission someone else had begun. How grateful I am that he was willing to do that and to affirm the equality of women in the Reformed Jewish community. Now, finding a job was not all that easy. Some congregations wanted me for my publicity value. They wanted to be able to say they were the first, and others would not talk to me at all. In the end, I was the last person in my class to get a job. But in my opinion, I got the best job of all, assistant rabbi at Stephen Wise Free Synagogue in New York City. It always seemed particularly appropriate to me that I would come to a synagogue with a reputation for commitment to equality and social justice. Rabbi Edward E. Klein, my senior rabbi, always took great pride in being introduced as the first equal opportunity employer in the American Rabbinate. I stayed at the Free Synagogue for 7 years. And to be honest, the circumstances under which I left were not all that pleasant. I hoped I would be given a chance at some point to be the senior rabbi, but that was not to be. Neither that synagogue nor any other was ready nor willing to grant the title of senior rabbi to a woman. For 2 years, I found it difficult. I couldn't find another job, another full-time position. During that time, I served as a chaplain at Lenox Hill Hospital, and I accepted a part-time position at Temple Beth El in Elizabeth, New Jersey, a synagogue of older members who were very warm and welcoming. In 1981, I became the rabbi of Monmouth Reform Temple in Tinton Falls, New Jersey, a position I was privileged to hold for 25 years. The decision to retire 15 years ago was my own, believing as I do that rabbis and a lot of other people should know when to leave. You should leave and say goodbye when they still like you. I did choose, however, to remain in my community, and as Rabbi Emerita, I worship at my temple every week, enjoying, as I do, the view from the pew. I've never regretted my decision to enter the rabbinate, and clearly my life has been enriched by the people I have been privileged to serve for nearly 5 decades now. I am grateful to God that part of my life's work has been to open new doors for women in the Jewish community. But at the same time, I have tried never to lose sight of the larger mission of the Jewish people, which is to derive from the words of Torah a set of values and a sense of holiness that will enable us always to be partners with God in completing the world. And what that means from my vantage point is not only participating in the task of Tikkun Olam, but creating a Jewish community based on equality and inclusivity, remembering that all of us are God's children, and as such, we should all have the opportunity to fulfill our creative potential to the fullest. My experience tells me that we are richer for the gifts that female rabbis and female leaders bring to our shared task. Rethinking previous models of leadership and opening doors to partnership and networking and empowering people to become responsible for their own Jewishness. Discovering new models of divinity, knowing that God embodies characteristics both masculine and feminine. Training new leaders to be more gender aware by welcoming to our institutions of higher learning respected female scholars, able to share with us valuable lessons and insights that are unique to women. Creating new role models and allowing to be heard, often for the first time, the stories of those whose voices have been silenced for too long. The countless number of women who have enriched our people from biblical times on. Surely one of the most powerful lessons we learn from the civil rights movement is that if you do not see someone who looks like you in a position of leadership, then you begin to feel left out. You have a sense that it cannot be done. We teach our daughters and our sons that everything is possible. There are no limits on what they can achieve when seeking to fulfill their creative potential and contribute to the vitality of the Jewish people. But sometimes when they interact with the institutions of Judaism, they discover a different message, a message that continues to exist in the larger society of which we are a part, a reluctance to believe that women are as competent and capable as men. For decades now, we have been trying to change that attitude in every field of human endeavor: medicine, law, accounting, education, even politics. For the sake of our survival, we need to continue to work to change it in the Jewish community as well, to make certain that our daughters and granddaughters can be whatever they want to be, that they have not only equal opportunity, but equal pay, and that they are free from all forms of sexual harassment. Ordaining women as rabbis has also taught us something about the meaning of success. When I was first ordained, I thought the ultimate goal was to become rabbi of a large congregation. Indeed, as the first woman to be ordained, I thought it was my obligation. In so many different ways, we are taught that bigger is better. But in reality, life is not measured by wealth or power, by material possessions or fame. Life is counted in terms of goodness and growth. Someone once said that our purpose in living is not to get ahead of other people, but to get ahead of ourselves, always to play a better game of life. That is what success is always about. Have we done our best? Are we continuing to grow? Are we affected more deeply today by love and beauty and joy than we were yesterday? Are we more sensitive and compassionate to others? Have we learned to overcome our fears and accept our failures? Have we triumphed over selfishness and bitterness, cruelty and hatred? Do we count our blessings in such a way that we make our blessings count? That, to me, is what success is all about. The words of Albert Schweitzer: the great secret of success is to go through life as a person who never gets used up. Grow into your ideals so that life can never rob you of them. Now, people often think that I am the first woman rabbi, but in fact, I am the second. Regina Ionas was the first woman in the world to become a rabbi. She studied for the Rabbinate in Berlin, but the professor who was her mentor died the year before she was to be ordained, and then the seminary refused to follow through with her ordination, although she had completed all the requirements, including a thesis entitled, "Can Women Serve as Rabbis?" She was forced to wait until 1935 when she was ordained privately by Rabbi Max Dienemann, president of the Association of Liberal Rabbis in Berlin. At first, she was permitted to work only in schools, hospitals, and homes for the elderly. But as rabbis began to emigrate or be deported during the Holocaust, she was invited to preach and fulfill rabbinic duties at various synagogues, gaining a reputation for her pastoral work, and her preaching ability. A few years ago, I had the privilege of visiting Berlin and walking in the footsteps of Regina Ionas with a group of rabbis, historians, and lay people. The trip was the idea of Dr. Gary Zola of the American Jewish Archives. He convinced the United States Commission for the Preservation of America's Heritage Abroad to place a plaque at Terezin in memory of Regina Ionas. And he invited the Jewish Women's Archive and its founding director, Dr. Gail Reamer, to co-sponsor the trip. It was an amazing experience that words cannot really convey. I was quite shaken by the number of similarities between my life and that of Regina Ionas. She did not see herself as a pioneer or a famous person, and neither did I. I just wanted to be a rabbi, and so did she. Both of us shared a similar definition of feminism. That is, all people should be given the opportunity to fulfill their God-given potential to the fullest. Her mentor died the year before she was ordained, and so did mine. In her case, the seminary refused to follow through, even though she had completed all the requirements. And in my case, those who tried to stop my ordination were unsuccessful. I was always held to a higher standard, and so was she. And often male rabbis and lay leaders told me to be patient, a word with which she was also familiar. She did not think a female rabbi should marry and have children. It would be too difficult. And ultimately, I came to the same decision, believing I myself would never be able to do both and do them well. She loved to preach and teach. In Terezin, we've found papers on which she had handwritten titles for some of her lectures, Women in Judaism, Women in the Bible, all the same topics that I and all women rabbis have spoken about. Before being deported to Terezin, Rabbi Ionas gave her documents to the Berlin Jewish community for safekeeping. Had she not done so, we would know even less than we do now about her life and the significant contributions that she made to the Jewish community, which in many ways continue even today. Not realizing that I was in effect following in her footsteps, I announced several years ago that I would be donating my documents and papers to the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati. And I invited all female rabbis of whatever denomination to do the same, so that those doing research on the history of women in the rabbinate can come to one place and find what they need. When we were in Berlin, we had an opportunity to see her papers, which had remained hidden until after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And that's probably why so many of us never heard of her. We were overwhelmed with emotion when the archivist brought out this tiny box of papers, all we have left of Rabbi Regina Ionas, except for those few handwritten notes we saw at Terezin. It was at Terezin that we dedicated a plaque in her memory, ensuring that she would never again be forgotten. Participating in the ceremony were, among others, Helga Hoskova, an artist who at that time was one of the 100 remaining survivors of Terezin, and her son and granddaughter, who provided music on the violin and organ for the ceremony. I will never again hear Kol Nidre without remembering their rendition. Helga's story reminds us that God enables ordinary people to do extraordinary things, and that Holocaust survivors triumphed over Hitler by returning to life rather than retreating from it, by having children and grandchildren, and showing that despite the horrors of the Holocaust, there is meaning and purpose in human life. The four firsts, Rabbi Sandy Sasso of the Reconstructionist movement, Rabbi Amy Eilberg of the Conservative movement, Rabbi Sarah Hurwitz of the Modern Orthodox movement, and me representing Reform, participated in the ceremony at Terezin. Each of us read a passage written by Regina Ionas herself, and this is part of what I chose to read. I hope a time will come for all of us in which there will be no more questions on the subject of woman. For as long as there are questions, something is wrong. But if I must say what drove me as a woman to become a rabbi, two elements come to mind: my belief in the godly calling and my love for people. God has placed abilities and callings in our hearts without regard to gender. Thus, each of us has the duty, whether man or woman, to realize those gifts that God has given. If you look at things this way, one takes woman and man for what they are, human beings. Every time I read those words, I can't believe that they were written in the 1930s. And there was something quite remarkable about giving life to her words on that day and affirming our connection to her. Then we recited El Malei Rachamim, perhaps the first time that this memorial prayer had ever been recited for Regina Ionas. As I think about her, one of the things I admire most is that she chose the well-being of her people over her own self-interest. She could have escaped the horrors of the Holocaust, but chose instead to accompany her people to the concentration camps, to continue to minister to their needs, and to help them find meaning and purpose in the values of Jewish tradition. We cannot help but stand in awe of her courage. We return from our journey prepared to tell her story, to ensure that she is given her rightful place in the chain of Jewish tradition that binds together all the generations of our people, past, present, and future, and determined to make certain that her yahrzeit would be observed from year to year in synagogues of all denominations. The actual date of her death is unknown, but with the help of the Holocaust Museum in Washington and Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, we determined that she was taken from Terezin together with her mother on October 12, 1944. Her name actually appears on the transport list, and arrived in Auschwitz on October 14, 1944, where it is assumed that she was murdered that very day, because we never heard anything else about her. And it just happens that that day happened to be Shabbat Bereshit, the first Shabbat of the year when we start the Torah all over again. So we have chosen Shabbat Bereshit as the date of her yahrzeit, and we hope that next fall you will join us in saying Kaddish for her. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to share her story. I like to think that whenever we do, we bring honor to her memory. I conclude now with some words of wisdom that came about a few years ago when I was asked to contribute to a book edited by Molly Mayer called "If I Only Had 5 Things to Pass On from My Life, They Would Be." It's a great exercise. I don't think the book was ever published, when I was very disappointed because I really wanted to see what other people said. But it's a great exercise. I recommend it, especially before the holy days, maybe a program for Slichot. Think about what you would want to pass on from your life. And I'm going to share with you now my 5 things. 1, know yourself and be yourself. When I was in rabbinical school, I always assumed I would marry and have children. In fact, I often said that in my synagogue, there would be a nursery next to my study. After I was ordained and began serving God and the Jewish people, I discovered that I would never be able to have a career and a family and do both well. I stand in awe of those who can, but I know that I'm not one of them. I chose to devote all my time and energy to my career. And I've never been sorry, because I know that the people whose lives I touch are now part of my extended family. Number 2, don't worry. There are moments in every life when worry overwhelms us and inhibits our ability to function. For those times, I have developed my worry rule. Sit down every morning for 10 minutes and worry as much as you want. Then get up and welcome the many opportunities for growth and for good that each new day brings, and make the most of them. There will be another 10 minutes tomorrow to worry again. Number 3, always try your best. Many people hesitate to try new things because they are afraid of failure. I believe the only true failure is in never daring to fail. Success feels good, but there's nothing wrong with failure as long as we try our best and learn from our mistakes. The world moves forward every day because someone is willing to take the risk. Number 4, live with humility. Our sages taught people should have 2 pockets so they can reach into one or the other according to their needs. In one pocket, there should be a slip of paper with the words, "For my sake was the world created." And in the other, the words, "I am but dust and ashes." In our day and age, humility seems to be a forgotten virtue. Being humble does not mean that we should deny or negate our achievements. On the contrary, taking pride in what we have accomplished brings great joy. But pausing to remember that we do not stand alone is even more enriching. Saying thank you on a regular basis to God, who gives us the power to create, and to others who have helped us along the way, keeps us from becoming arrogant. And finally, maintain your sense of humor. One way to deal with life's difficulties is by discovering and embracing the healing power of laughter. Many a tense moment has been relieved by bringing a bit of humor to the situation. An old Yiddish proverb advises, weep before God, laugh before people. Learning to laugh soothes the spirit, and learning to laugh at yourself keeps you from taking yourself too seriously. Laughter is contagious, and it makes the world a more pleasant place. As I come now to the end of my remarks and prepare to take your questions, let me share with you my favorite poem, "The Road Not Taken" by Robert Frost, which pretty much sums up the way I feel about my life. Two roads diverged in a wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim, because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had worn them really about the same. And both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Thank you so much. And I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have. I think the rabbi is going to facilitate that for us.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Preisand. It was really, I've learned so much about you throughout the course of my life, but I'm not sure that I've had the chance to hear you speak. And so it was really an honor for me as well. We have so many wonderful questions in the chat. I'm going to start with Chloe and Ben's question, because I think that'll set us off on a nice trajectory, which is going back to your story. When you applied to HUC, and I shared at our last class some of the documentation that went back and forth between you and HUC that I found online about what exactly are you asking to do? And no, this really is what I'm planning to do. And no, I do understand what it is. When you first applied, did you believe that you would truly be the first woman to achieve rabbinic ordination? We also learned about some other women who had been in the program and did everything but ordination. Or did you think you would at least get that start? Or did you believe that you would come to the end and truly be ordained as a rabbi?
Well, I always believed I would be ordained. Now, when I was in high school, I went on a nifty pilgrimage to HUC in Cincinnati. We were all gathered, all these young people gathered together in the chapel, and I raised my hand and I said, can a woman be a rabbi? And Dr. Samuel Sandmel didn't really answer the question. He didn't say no and he didn't say yes, but it was after that I wrote to the college. And yes, if you saw some of the letters back and forth, they really thought that I wanted to be, or I should be, an educator. The assistant provost at that time had been a student rabbi at my congregation in Cleveland, so he knew me, and I'm sure this wasn't in your notes that you were given for the curriculum, because not very many people know this. I'm probably the only student that never appeared before the admissions committee. So, I think it was because I entered the undergraduate program, which meant 4 years at the University of Cincinnati, enabled me. I took Hebrew courses at HUC at that time. It enabled me to skip the first year of the rabbinic school. So 1 year I was an undergraduate. The next year I was in the second year of rabbinic school, and everybody kind of looked at each other and said, she's still here. So I'm not exactly certain why I was never called before the admissions committee, but hearing many stories about the admissions committee, I'm glad that I wasn't. Again, because of Dr. Nelson Glick, he gave me just many opportunities to, when the Board of Governors met on the Cincinnati campus, he would call me in to give the opening prayer, or I would be assigned to officiate at the service that day. And all sorts of things like that. And in my third year, he began to arrange for me to travel around the country and speak, which I did a lot of, and which I also did the first year I was a rabbi, because it was important, I thought, for women to see me, and I'm human and just like everybody else. And it was amazing back in the 70s, the early 70s, how many people would come. I went to a synagogue once, 1,000 people showed up. And I was like, 1,000. I looked out, I'm a very private person, and I had to learn how to accept the publicity. When I first came to HUC, there was a woman ahead of me in the undergraduate program. Her name was Ann Blitzstein. She did marry Rabbi Howard Fobe, and she dropped out. Unfortunately, he died too young, and she came back and she was ordained. I was present for the day of her ordination, which was very special. So I never thought about being the first or what I was going to have to do. I got used to having press conferences wherever I went. Once I was on an airplane flying in someplace, there were famous people on the plane, a congressman, an entertainer, whatever. As we're getting ready to land, the attendant said, will Rabbi Sally please stay on the plane? So everybody got off the plane, and then I started down the steps, and all the cameras went on, and they ushered me into a room in the airport for a press conference. So I think that the real challenge there was always to make it sound like a question they asked was never asked before. What a great question. So I learned a lot of things about that.
And I'm sure you're doing that for us right now. We feel brilliant.
No, that's okay. It's not the same now as it was in the beginning.
I'm sure. So speaking of that kind of period of time in which you were really the only one sharing the experience of what it was like to be a woman rabbi, and now having seen really such a shift in what the rabbinate looks like. All three of my children have been in the nursery school at Temple. So it's almost like your vision of the rabbi's office next to the nursery has come to life for my generation in a way that never could have been possible, I think, in your generation. What major differences do you find in the teachings between male and female rabbis? Do you feel that there's a different emphasis on Judaism? How would you distinguish the difference between a women's rabbinate and a men's rabbinate?
Well, when I was growing up, the rabbi was always the authority for everything. You went to the rabbi, even at a board meeting, the rabbi would say, this is what we're going to do. And everybody would say, yes, rabbi. And that was that. And I decided very early on that was not the kind of rabbi I wanted to be, that I really wanted to be a partner with my congregation. And when I came to Monmouth Reformed Temple, I explained that to them, that I would serve on all the committees with them, and we would discuss together what we were planning to do. And we did that, and sometimes I lost, and I just accepted graciously. And then a few years later, I would bring it up again. So there have been so many studies by Carol Gilligan and others that show that women are much more concerned about establishing relationships, nurturing, and networking. And I think that having women in the rabbinate has enabled our male colleagues to do that too. I don't think they used to. I think more and more of them do that today. I've never really thought that much about the difference between a male rabbi and a female rabbi. I don't like to make generalizations, and I think that you just have to accept each person for who she or he is, and accept what qualities they have. And my congregation certainly accepted, allowed me to do that. They let me be creative, experiment, have ideas. And one of the things when I retired, they said they would miss the most is hearing me say, I have an idea. Because it would always require a lot of work, but we would do it together, and it would benefit our congregation and our community.
Thank you. You inadvertently just plugged our next session, so thank you for that. We'll be next time we'll be looking at my rabbinic thesis together, which was a feminist critique of Rabbi Jack H. Bloom's theory of the rabbi as a symbolic exemplar. And my take on it is that women rabbis, through the work of Carol Gilligan and other kinds of relational thinking, have broken down what it means to be a symbol. So tune back next week, right. Tuesday at noon.
That's good.
It'll be a fun discussion. The question that was sent to me in the private chat is about not just in the rabbinate, but in kind of all positions of leadership, when people are aspiring to be a leader and the path that they take to get there. That today it maybe seems that it's easy to just kind of get into the media, either social media or the newspaper, other ways, without the process of mentorship and learning. And so I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on mentoring and teaching? Is this something you've been able to make a part of your rabbinate, especially now, now that you're seeing so many generations follow in your footsteps?
Well, I have not been able to mentor specifically, have somebody assigned to me. I have not participated in that program. But I have always been very willing to help people, guide people if they communicate with me, if they have questions, even if they want to interview me. Over my whole rabbinate, a lot of women and girls have chosen me as their history of Women's History Month person to write about, or American Jewish Heritage Month, or whatever. And one time a boy chose me. And I was kind of surprised that a boy chose me. And I asked, why did you choose me? And he said, because you're the only one on the list who was still alive. So I guess he didn't want to he wanted to meet somebody and not go to the library and research. I don't know. So I've tried to mentor in that way. And the other way that I've tried to mentor is that I still go to the Union Biennial, to the CCAR convention, and to the WRN convention. I go to all of them. And I do that because I haven't, except for 2 weeks ago virtually, I haven't gone to Naor, the convention for retired rabbis, because I have the other 3 to go to. And I feel that our colleagues benefit from having older rabbis with experience at conventions so they can talk to the person. I know when I was first ordained, there were many rabbis, Sam Karp, Arthur Lelyveld, Roland Gittleson, just so many that I learned from by going to conventions. So I feel that in that sense, I'm mentoring people.
Thank you. And I think you absolutely are. And I just want to thank you for being so quick to respond when I reached out to do this. It was, I did not really think we would actually have this chance. And I thought I was just reaching out, and clearly it has been important. And along those lines, Andrea asked if you have any, she said that she read Judaism and the New Woman, and do you have plans to write more so that we can continue learning from you?
Yes, well, Judaism and the New Woman was based on my rabbinic thesis, And it was, let's see, I think in 75 or something. So it was a very, very long time ago. And everybody wants me to write a book, but I've been very hesitant to do that. One of the things that I contribute to books. So for example, The Sacred Calling, 4 Decades of Women in the Rabbinate, which was the Jewish book, got the Jewish Book Award a few years back. I did write the introduction, and there is an interview in the book with me. I'm also becoming kind of used to writing forewords to books. And Alden Solovey, who's a great liturgist, I wrote the foreword to his book, This Joyous Soul, Modern Prayers. And I was pleased to do that. I wrote an introduction for a book of the women rabbis in England who were honoring Regina Ionas, and the first woman in England, Jackie Tabik. I wrote, and they put together a book of sermons totally by women rabbis in England. And I wrote the introduction to that. I'm also interviewed in a lot of different books, so you can always find something about me somewhere. I think to myself, I don't know if I'm ever going to write the book. I have a title for the book. I'm all set to go, but I am so busy. And, to me, being able to speak with you today is like the silver lining of COVID, because we all learned to use Zoom. And I know I do this a lot. And I know that I would never be able to visit all these congregations. I just wouldn't have the strength to do it. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be able to speak with you this way, and to meet a whole lot of other people. And who knows when our paths may cross again.
Thank you. I'll take your lesson on humility later as I keep plugging everything I've done as well for next week. But so the last the last question I want to ask you, there's 2 more, and if we can get them in the next 2 minutes, that'll be great. First of all, how are you spending your time now in your retirement? And what do you enjoy doing? And lastly, was Regina Ionas's thesis one of the surviving documents? And if so, do you know if it's available?
It is available. There's a book written about Regina Ionas, and the book includes her thesis. It's very interesting, and you can find the book on Amazon. Just look up Regina. I honestly can't remember the title right now or the author, but you'll see it. It won't be hard to find. What do I do in my, when I retired, my hobbies are photography and abstract watercolor. And when I retired, I was planning to paint a lot, and I haven't done it because I got too involved in too many things. I'm very active in our community. I'm the president of an organization called Interfaith Neighbors, which provides rental assistance and support services to the working poor in our community. And before COVID, I was traveling and speaking around the country and serving as a scholar in residence for a weekend. So that was what I was doing. I also, I have a dog. His name is Zeke. He's a Boston Terrier. We took obedience classes and we failed. And they named him the Holy Terror. So he's adorable, which I always tell him, good thing you're so cute. I got him when he was 12 weeks old. He's now 5, and he's gotten way too used to having me here all the time. But when I travel, I always try to go someplace where I can drive, and he goes with me. As a matter of fact, in one congregation, I talked them into letting him come to religious school. And we went around and visited all the classes. The kids had a blast, and so did he.
I bet they love that. Rabbi Preisand, thank you so much for spending this time with us today. Really, you all can unmute and say thank you and applaud, because we want you to hear our gratitude for you, not just for your speaking today, but for all you've done. And I know that I would not be where I am were it not for you. And so lest I get emotional, I'll stop talking. Thank you so much. It really has been such an honor. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Be well, stay safe, and I hope our paths cross again.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. See you next week. Thank you. Thank you.